I'm Gerard Pixie, craft hairdresser and co-founder of the Hairbrained community. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest, Marina Lantos. Marina is the owner of Serenity Hair Lounge in New Jersey, and she's also a real Instagram phenom with over 180,000 followers. She really earned those followers by sharing weekly educational videos featuring feminine, short women's haircuts that were super salon friendly, and has already taught literally thousands of people how to be better craft hairdressers. Today, she's going to be working with us on her course, all about Pixies, from Classic to Edgy. Can we talk a little bit about the difference between Classic Pixies and Edgy Pixies and what you're going to be sharing in the course?
Yes, of course. First of all, I'm so excited to be here and so excited to share what I already know and how I can make your life behind the chair a little bit easier and better. So the main difference to me between a classic and an edgy haircut is classic is always going to be approached very classically. Where you need to know your foundations, where you need to know your body position and hand position. For an edgy haircut, we also incorporate a little bit of disconnection or a different tool to use. So what I like about edgier looks or creative looks or things that are not as classic and can't necessarily be worn for every single person, what I love most about them is that they're very versatile. You can use a different tool to create more texture. You can use a different tool or styling product to create more volume where you naturally wouldn't get the volume if you're doing a classic look.
With your Classic Pixie, it's more about blending, connecting, getting the angles just right. And then as you get into your Edgy Pixie, you're gonna kind of break the rules a little bit, like there'll be disconnection and you're gonna use a razor as well?
Sure,
yeah.
You know, breaking the rules, you have to be careful with, you have to know
You're
the rules,
a law
right?
abider. Yeah, I know you, Marina, is
90% of that. But of course, if you break the rules and create disconnection in certain areas, you can achieve a totally different look. In my lesson for the Edgy Pixie, I will be using my feather razor. And what I love best about the feather razors is you create really soft, serrated edge on the ends to create that movement and beach waves, and you can get lots of texture in the hair.
Something that comes up often for students and hairdressers everywhere working with shorter women's hair is keeping it feminine.
Yes.
What are some of your tips and how are you going to share in the course how you can keep both of these looks feminine?
Absolutely. So I hear it from my clients all the time. I think the key is the consultation, of course, because for someone like me, I don't love feminine. I love stronger edges. I like hairline to be gone. So of course in the consultation it's very important to really get to know the person who is sitting in your chair and
right, because it's about them, not you.
It is
ultimately.
Unfortunately or fortunately, it is about them, right? So for me, it is really paying attention to the hairlines, how you're going to approach the hairline, what you're going to do around the hairline to really preserve that femininity in the hair. In our first haircut that we'll be doing today in today's lesson, the classic haircut is the one that we're going to go over the hairline and how to preserve the length around the front to really keep it soft.
Right, so it's those little subtle details that can make it more feminine. Or like you said, sometimes you like stronger things. How do you amp it up? So you ready to cut some hair?
I sure am.
Well, I'm super excited to learn from Marina, so let's do this.
Okay, so we're going to start with our first lesson, which is going to be the Classic Pixie. I went ahead and pre-sectioned my mannequin. So let's talk a little bit about sectioning. Sectioning that I'm taking for this particular head shape and this particular haircut is from the apex area to the high of the round of the head. And then I subsection the top section through here where the head shape starts to round off. So I'm gonna go ahead and spin her so you guys can see. So some of the things that we have to pay attention to when we're doing a classic pixie is a body position and a hand position. So for this particular head shape, a head shape is pretty perfect, obviously, because she's a doll head. I'm going to keep my fingers really classic. If your client's coming in and they have a little bit more of a rounded head shape, please adjust your fingers to make sure that you're compensating for that. So my first section is going to be a diagonal section, diagonally going back away from the face. I'm going to stand directly in front of my section to make sure that my body position is correct. So the first section that I'm taking is going to be diagonal, going slightly back, away from the front hairline. the width of the section should always depend on the density and the natural texture of the client. Some of the things that we have to do to keep a pixie feminine is to preserve a little bit of length around the front hairline. So what I'm going to be showing you today is the proper movement of your fingers and what you do with them to preserve that length. So if I bring this first section towards the face, I'm going to preserve the length that's in the back of this section. So if you want to preserve the length that's going around the face, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to move this section away from the face, and that's going to be called our over direction. Where we're moving our fingers and where we're cutting the hair will dictate where we're leaving the length. So if I stand right directly in front of my section and then do one step back away from the face, I'm going to preserve the length, and once that hair falls, it will be nice and soft and feminine for my client. All right, so now that we discussed our over direction for the first section, I'm going to discuss our elevation. Elevation is the amount of movement that we're creating in our haircut. The higher you elevate, the more length you're going to preserve underneath, and the tighter you're going to cut the top. So for our classic pixie, we want our shape to be head hugging with a little bit more length through the top. Since the length on the top is going to gradually get longer, I want to make sure that the length that I have on the top of this section is long enough that I can connect it to the top. So once I bring this section out, figure out my over direction, I'm going to tuck my knuckles in. So my knuckle is going to be right against her skin, and my fingertips are going to be about an inch away from her head shape. Again, what we discussed prior, if the head shape is not ideal and someone has a flatter head shape, you want to over direct or move your fingers farther away to compensate for that. If someone has a really round head shape, you want to do the opposite. You want to keep your fingers a little bit closer to the head shape. All right, so I'm ready to cut my first section. Figure out my over direction, stand directly square or in front of your section, move one step back. Elevation and my finger position, knuckles tucked, fingertips slightly away from the face, and I'm going to move away from the head to preserve even more length. If I leave a little too much length, I could always take it shorter after. But if it's too short, then I might run into a problem afterwards. So here's my first section. My every section until I reach the back are going to be mimicking to what I did just now. So diagonal section, following the front hairline and following the section that I just took. So instead of moving the section back away from the face to preserve that length, I'm going to move the section forward to make sure that I preserve a little bit of length that's going to be in the back of the head. And that's going to give me a little bit of a security blanket right in the apex area where usually we have cowlicks. All right, so collect the two sections that I have in my fingers, the first section and the second section that I haven't cut. I'm staying in the exactly same spot for this second section. Figure out your elevation. Knuckles are going to be closer to the head shape, fingertips slightly away. Why do we keep the fingers away from the head shape? Because we want to make sure that we're creating graduated shape and preserving the length that's going to be closer to the parietal ridge. As I'm cutting, what I'm paying attention to is my body position. I'm also paying attention to my finger position. If I create a shape of a cutting line that's not fluid, then I'm not creating a fluid silhouette of this haircut. So what do I mean by that? Whenever I do any graduated shape, I want to make sure that my finger position continues from the top of the section all the way to the bottom of the section. So the section that I'm doing, even though I'm taking two subsections to create it, is a fluid cutting line. It's very, very important for any graduations that we do. My next section, again, is going to be parallel to the previous. Comb that hair out of the way, clip it out of the way, and now my over direction is going to be one section forward towards the face. Now that I've taken my section, I'm going to go ahead and move the doll head over so you can see the angle of my fingers. All right, so again, my over direction, I'm placing the comb right against the scalp, moving the hair with the comb and bringing it where the hair grows on my second section. So since I'm working on section number 3 and moving the hair towards the section number 2, I'm creating a little tiny bit of length on my section number 3. So my over direction is called into the previous. With each section that I take, I'm going to preserve just enough length that by the time I get to the back of the head, I'll have a little security blanket making sure that my occipital bone and my apex areas are not sticking out due to the cowlicks. So my section number 4, nothing's changing. My elevation stays the same. So does my over direction. Over direction is into the previous. And my knuckles are always going to be tucked in on this section while my fingertips are going to be slightly out. So some of the things that we always have to pay attention to is obviously the head shape. When we discussed how we can alter our fingers or how we can adjust the angle that we're working with to compensate for the roundness of the head or the flatness. Another thing that we have to pay attention is to our hairlines. So I hear it so often with my clients that they want to see the ear exposed, or the opposite, they want to see some softness around the hair. So the areas that are working around the hairline will be dictated by how you're holding your fingers. So for example, if this client wanted to preserve a little bit of length because she was self-conscious about her ears, what I would do is I would point my knuckles not so close to the head shape, but maybe straighten them out just a little tiny bit and create a little bit more length right between those knuckles. All right, so my section number 4, my over direction, I'm bringing the hair just one section forward. So I'm bringing the hair so that it grows. So I'm bringing the section, one section forward to where section number 3 grows. Now that my hairline is much lower on the head and I'm working with a wider section, I want to make sure that the fluid line that I created, a cutting line, is going all the way, not just to the top of the ear, but all the way down to the nape. If you have to adjust your client's head position, do so at this moment so that you really make sure that you're putting those knuckles all the way right against skin. I'm going to continue going in the same exact motion. Clean sections. The width of the section will always be dictated by the texture, the density. If someone's hair is pokier, you want to take thinner sections so you really can see what you're working with. Clip it out of the way to make sure that you can always see your section nice and clean. For beginners, if you have a hard time getting your sections stay clean, I recommend subsectioning the first sections out of the way. To make it easier, always try to keep your two sections in your fingers. The amount of hair that you feel comfortable will depend on the width of your fingers and the length of your fingers. So if you get a little bit lost in your sectioning, go ahead and subsection behind the section and in front of the section, and then only keep just these two sections between your fingers. All right, so I'm going to continue going the same exact manner. My next section, again, diagonal, really keeping in mind that the section is parallel to the previous. When I place the comb into the hair, I'm going to make sure that my body position is directly in front of the section that I'm working on. My elevation is the same as what I started with. My knuckles closer, fingertips slightly out. With each section, I'm going to recomb the hair, and instead of moving my fingers up, I'm going to move them down with the hair so that the elevation of each individual hair strand that I'm cutting is staying even and fluid throughout the whole entire section. Now that we're approaching nape area is another biggie for keeping keeping our haircuts really feminine. For some clients that have jumpy hairlines, I have a saying, when in doubt, cut it out, right? Because if something doesn't behave, it's going to be really hard for a client to work with. If client says, please leave my hairline softer, what you want to do is keep this line fluid, and then once you get to the underneath the occipital bone, that's when you're going to slightly slide your knuckles farther away from the head to preserve the length. That will give you just enough room for that softness and the fringiness around the back hairline. So since the name of the Pixie is Classic, I use this technique for my younger generation, for younger girls that want a pixie haircut, the Halle Berries, or if I have older women that are coming in and asking for this haircut as well. So, and how you alter your fingers and what you do with your over direction will really dictate how edgy or how classic this haircut can look. Even though their approach is really classic, it doesn't have to look boring, right? If you preserve a little bit extra length on the top, it's going to give you more of a disconnected look, or it's going to give you a bit more of a fun look. If you connect everything and you continue working really classically, then it's going to be your bread and butter of a haircut for every pixie client that's coming in. All right, so I'm going to continue all the way down to the nape, working my hand position exactly the same as I've been. And my finger position stays exactly the same. So what I find about doing classic work is if you get that first section correct and you cross-check it and you check it and you make sure that the length is right, the rest of the haircut becomes really easy. Because all you're doing is you're doing repetitive motion and you continue doing exactly the same thing over and over. The beauty of classic work is once you get the hand position, the rest is easy. So my fingers are still pointing towards exactly the same part of the head, right? And my knuckles are slightly closer, but my sections are so much wider, so it does feel a little bit more awkward to go ahead and work all the way from up here all the way down to the nape. So I always say that when someone starts to do pixies, or they are slightly uncomfortable working on such short length, go with your gut feeling. If you see a guide underneath and you know your sections are clean, just go with your gut feeling. Once you establish your muscle memory, and you've done this several times, it becomes easier and easier to work with. I'm gonna go ahead with each section, I'm gonna slightly move my client. And I'm always big on making sure that the client's head position is exactly where I need it to be. Client sits in that chair from anywhere from half hour to an hour, depending on the length of the haircut. But for us, we work long hours and we constantly have to put our body in weird positions, right? We all do these weird ninja stands to get that position just perfect or just right to get that haircut in. So always use your client and make them work for it so that it's easier on you. The more comfortable you are, the cleaner your section is going to be. And the cleaner your work is going to be. And in return, the happier the client is going to be. With each section, I'm making sure that I'm combing the hair all the way away from the sectioning that I'm working with, because I want to make sure that nothing is getting in my way. Elevation, just below parallel to the floor. That is the elevation that I started with. And my over direction, if I pay attention to where the hair grows from the head I want to bring that section just a little tiny bit to the right into the previous section to preserve the length. And now my knuckles are pointing all the way to the nape and right to the back hairline. I have one last section left on my first side. And from that point, I'm going to switch my body position and work all the way from the front hairline to the back. So the reason why we switch our body position, or we switch our hand position, why don't I just work all the way from the front hairline to the opposite front hairline? Because I'm combing the hair into the previous and I'm working from front to the back, I want to do the opposite on my second side. So I want to place my fingers to make my life as easy as possible while I'm preserving the same exact weight distribution as I did on my first side. So if I don't change my body position and I continue going in the same manner, most likely I'll end up preserving too much length at the front hairline on my second side.
So Marina, I'm really enjoying this. I'm learning tons from watching you. I've got some questions on behalf of our students, just to get a little bit more clarification.
Sure.
So lots of times when people start haircuts, they start in the center back, and then they have that one guideline and it's easy to work forward. With this technique, you start each side on the front, on two opposite sides. I imagine that could be really hard to get a good balance. Do you have any tips for people at home when they want to try to start from the front to match up the sides?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And no matter how many years of experience you have, always you want to double check and triple check. So what I usually do is I start on my first side, whatever my diagonal section that I take, I always go with my gut feeling and cut just a little bit longer on the opposite side. Once I cut the second side, then I cross-check by bringing hair at the same elevation, same over direction, and you want to measure for the lengths of the hair on the top and the bottom of your section as well. Now, while you're cutting your whole entire side, section by section, you want to pay attention to your surroundings. So if you're standing directly in front of the section, you want to make sure that with each section, you move just enough as whatever the width of the section is. And if your over direction stays the same and your body position constantly changes, then you will always keep in check with your haircut.
Thanks for those tips, Marina. I think people are going to find that really helpful when they're working in the salon. Now, it's also important that techniques are versatile. If you were doing this on curly or wavy hair, would you do anything differently?
I would, and that definitely will depend on how curly the curly hair is and how wavy or how straight and pokey the hair is. So if someone has really curly hair, what you want to watch out for is how much it's going to spring. So the more it's going to spring, the farther you want to work away from the head shape. So the longer the length that you want to preserve.
With both those questions, it's about being conservative and judging the length, judging the curl and the pattern there.
Absolutely.
All right, I've got one last question because
Sure.
I know people are going to run into this problem. Sometimes when people work this way, they might not get their body positions perfect and they might end up over-directing too much. And instead of having this perfectly rounded shape, they might end up with like a wedge or a corner. I'm sure you've seen that happen in your classes.
Of course.
Now, it's going to happen. What's the best way to correct it without like losing the plan?
So I would always recommend just go back, find where the mistake started to happen, find where your asymmetry started to happen, and then work from there. If you do happen just maybe not find it in time and you do the whole blowout, then what you could do is you can work backwards. You can work from the back all the way until you find that area, and then you'll just run out of hair to cut once you get to the perfect spot.
Awesome. So I'm super excited to see the top and the finished look on this haircut. Are you ready?
Thank you. Ready?
All right, let's see it.
Now we're going to go ahead and start the top section of our Classic Pixie. I'm going to comb this down, take a horizontal section right in the center of the head. So this will be our mohawk section. I already have the guide coming from the back. I'm going to find it. I'm going to keep my elevation all the way up. Find the guide that you have coming from underneath. I'm going to see it in front of my fingers and then just slide out just a tiny bit. Let that hair fall in front of my fingers. And then my scissors are going to be mimicking my finger position. as I approach the front of the hairline or the front closer to the face, I'm going to make sure that my fingertips are just a tiny bit higher than my knuckles. What that means is I'm creating a length that's gradually getting longer towards the front. Now this is all customizable. If someone comes in and they say they don't really want the extra length in the front, you're going to keep your fingers parallel to the floor. If someone comes in and they say, I want the length in the front to be much longer, then direction on how your fingers in comparison to your knuckles are will be much more severe. So again, how you point your fingers will dictate the length that you're leaving in the front in comparison to the back. So now that you guys know my elevation, we're going to discuss our over direction. Over direction is going to be on base, which means we're going to be working with the round of the head. With each section, instead of bringing the hair directly into the center, we're going to bring it exactly where the hair grows from the head. So section 1 gets combed out, section 2 gets combed out, and section 1 gets moved to where section 2 lives on the head. And so on until we run out of hair to cut. So this is my section 3. I have a couple more sections to go, keeping my finger position exactly the same as how I've done, while keeping my elevation exactly the same and over direction following the head shape. Now, if you happen to over direct the hair a little too far into the center, what would happen is you would preserve the length on the edges of this section. And by preserving the length, you would create a little bit of disconnection between your section 1 and your section 2. So there is a way to cross-check that in. And I am going to show you in case that does happen. And sometimes you need to do that if someone's parietal ridge, which is the round of the head, sort of sticks out a little bit, and then that shape doesn't fall fluidly. All right, so the same thing on the opposite side. I already have my guide established from the back and from the top. Now you guys can tell my over direction, keeping my sections on base, which means my second section on the side is going to be brought exactly where the hair grows from. So instead of combing the hair into the previous, and that's what we did in the previous section, underneath, now we're working on base and working with the round of the head. Here's my third section. My fingertips are pointing just a little bit higher than my knuckles. And I'm working with the round of the head all the way until I run out of hair to cut. Okay, and just to show you guys another view, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin her all the way around so you guys can see my over direction. So here's my first section. I'm going to bring that section directly up. My second section is, instead of going up, is going to be coming out straight from where the hair grows from. And my first section gets pushed towards my second section. Now you're going to see me cutting some hair on the third section. My first section will not be reaching my fingers because we're working on base, so we're working with constantly moving with each section. So the only section that I'm holding between my fingers is the section that I haven't cut and my section number 2. And the last part, last little bit that I have left over here is section number 4. Now section 2 does not reach, and I'm only holding section number 3 and number 4 between my fingers. I'm going to quickly show you guys a cross check. I'm going to make sure that my client's sitting really straight. If my sections were horizontal, my cross check is going to be the opposite, which is going to be a vertical cutting line or vertical sectioning, and my cross check is going to be the same elevation and same over direction. When I bring this all the way up, I should see a gentle rounded line. That means my over direction was on base and constantly moving. All right, and the last part that I have is my third section. I'm going to use the guide that I created right on top of this section. The sections are going to be slightly less classic, but the approach is still very easy, very achievable. My first section is going to be a horizontal section. I'm going to comb the hair out of the way. I'm going to bring the section all the way up. Use the guide that I created in my section number 2. And then my fingers are going to be parallel to the floor. So this is the same situation. If client comes in and they want their fringe to be much, much longer, you can move your fingers much farther away to preserve that length. So now my second section is going to be pivoting. Pivoting section starts from the same point of the head, but gets wider. So I have my guide coming from my first section that I did. My over direction is going to be all the way into my first section. So I have a stationary guide. The reason why I'm doing that is I want to preserve a little bit of the length that's going to be right on the outside of her eyebrow. And that's going to give her a really pretty fringe, really almost like a curtain bang, which is so popular these days. And it does make it look really, really feminine. Now, if you want to change how that looks, you don't have to over direct all the way into the first section. And that's going to give us the most severe over direction, which means the length from short to long is going to be quite big. So if you don't want to preserve, you can go ahead and do your over direction into the previous, or even work on base. And here is my second to last section. I'm continue working in the same exact manner. Bring my fingers all the way into the first section while keeping my fingertips and my knuckles parallel to the floor. All right, now that I finished my first side, I'm going to continue to do exactly the same thing on the opposite side. So same starting point. My pivot comes from the same exact point on the head. And that point is where connection from section 2 and section 3 is. My finger position does not change. Parallel to the floor, bring hair directly all the way up. While my fingers and my knuckles are parallel to the floor, and my over direction is all the way into the center. Comb the hair out of the way to make sure that you're working really clean. Since we're keeping our over direction is into our first section, it does get a little bit bulky because we have to keep all of our sections between our fingers. So just take an extra couple of combings, make sure that the hair that you're working with is really clean, so that your cutting line stays clean and precise. And I have my last section. I'm gonna comb all this hair right into the center. Easy way to remember where the center is really pay attention to her nose. So I wanna bring my fingers directly right on top of the bridge of her nose. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and do a vest brush blow dry. Vest brush is a phenomenal brush to use when you're doing a wrapping technique. Wrapping technique is a perfect technique to make this haircut be head hugging and the end result look feminine and soft and really easy for a client to achieve. Wrapping technique is technically wrapping the hair around the head. So we're using the head shape, which is round, as our roller and then wrapping the hair right around.
So it's been really interesting to watch this haircut progress. What I love about what Marina did here is it was so simple. It was really just 3 panels that each had a really specific purpose. I have a few questions for you, Marina, as always.
Sure.
With the length on the top, how do you choose exactly the length you want? Did you connect into the crown, or did you just visually create the length on the top?
So for this particular haircut, and because her cowlicks are very minimal, I did connect to the back. So the guide that we had from our first major section, I just went just a little tiny bit longer and used that as a guide for the front.
So from what you did underneath, below the round of the head and the crown, you picked that up to the ceiling, you gave yourself a little bit of extra room, and you used that as your guide.
Yes, that's exactly.
And then again, just to clarify, the crown area, or the back part of the horseshoe, was like on base.
Yep.
And then in front, it was all over directed into the center.
Yes.
And that's what's making this rad kind of curtain effect.
Yeah, which I love. I absolutely love the curtain bangs, and it's such a huge trend now, and they're just so sexy and timeless, work for everyone. So the only part that I want to do is just a little texturizing, a little bit of customization. So I think her fringe is just a little long, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick it up, drop the elevation quite low, make sure that the hair that I'm cutting is really clean and straight. So every grain of the hair follows the same direction. And then I want to make sure that the scissor goes right against the grain of the hair.
So now as you do this, point cutting obviously is an important part of finishing this look. The angle of the scissor, is it on an angle, on a diagonal? Is it perpendicular to your finger? And then how deep should people go?
So I think that's a really, really great question. And texturizing takes years and years to perfect. The best way to texturize is making sure that your scissor is parallel to the hair. So this will be a really great way to practice. My scissor is literally going right through the comb because the scissor and the comb, or the teeth of the comb, are parallel to each other.
That was like a hair ninja move
That
right
was,
there. Wow.
Gotta show off a little bit, right? So here's my texturizing, and then the last part I'm going to do is a little bit of slide cutting. So in slide cutting is you pick up the piece of hair that you want to texturize, you open the scissor, and you slide the scissors blade all the way to the ends.
Now, and you're opening and closing without closing all the way. You're not just dragging it down?
Yep. You
Okay.
want to do just a little tiny bit of chips so that you're not removing too much of the length, but just creating little channels within that section.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to let you do some more of the finishing technique here so we can see the big reveal. I know we're all excited to see how beautiful this finished look is going to turn out.